here's a funny story. So apparently not just the orange man who's been posting mean tweets, it's also Bernie Sanders supporters. A new book by Ryan Grimm, former host of this show, reveals that Elizabeth Warren, you might remember that she was a candidate for the Democratic nomination in 2020 against Bernie Sanders. She tried to convince AOC not to endorse Bernie Sanders by compiling lists of supporters of Senator Sanders, their mean tweets, that Warren herself directed that a long list of those tweets be compiled into a dossier that her staff would give to AOC to persuade him not to endorse the man who's beloved by the Bernie bros. I wonder how many of your mean tweets were in there.
So specifically, I have Ryan Grimm's new book, and I quickly went to the page, the relevant pages, and my tweets were named among, I think, Nina Turner's tweets and David Sirota's tweets as the chief architects of the mean tweeting. I stand by all my tweets, Robby. I have not deleted these tweets. You can go back and look for yourself. But I think that what we all now know from living on the internet is what people characterize as often as mean tweets are truthful criticisms of folks' own policies. And remember, this is at a time, this is probably around the summer of 2019, because that's AOC endorsed, finally sided with Bernie after the heart attack in October. So it would have had to have been some time before then when this lobbying was being done. And if you reflect back, this is a time at which Elizabeth Warren was dominating in the polls. So the best she did during that primary race was during the summer. She was
in the national polls.
In the primary polls, yeah. And she was putting out a lot of policies that were very progressive in a more, I think, regular, regimented, and well-produced way than was coming out of the Sanders campaign at the time. And the argument was, why stick with Sanders when you can have a female, younger version of Sanders who is doing a better job at the identity politics that were dominating, especially at the time, so much of Democratic Party politics. And that, if we read the relevant pages in the book, is part of the broader argument that's being made, that Bernie has a problem with black people, that Bernie has a problem with women, that Bernie bros are indicative of something about the man himself. And we saw this morph. The apotheosis of this argument came out months later during the debates, where, if you recall, Elizabeth Warren made this charge shortly before one of the debates that Bernie had told her in a private conversation that women couldn't be president, that a woman couldn't win the election. And what happened at the debate was, instead of interrogating both Warren and Sanders about whether or not this was a factual reality, whether it was true that Bernie Sanders, who has been a long supporter, obviously, of women in electoral politics, actually said this, this is how the moderator, Abby Martin, phrased the question. She said to Senator Warren, CNN reported yesterday, and Senator Sanders and
Abby Phillips, right?
Sorry, Abby Phillips. What did I just say?
Abby Martin.
Oh, sorry, not Abby Martin.
Yeah.
Very different person. Abby Phillips. She asked Elizabeth Warren. She asked Bernie Sanders, rather, why did you say that? So she framed Elizabeth Warren's argument and said, why did you say that? Not, did you say that, but why did you say that? Bernie Sanders obviously answered, I didn't say that. Then she turns to Elizabeth Warren and said, when he said that to you, what did you think? So completely assuming the premise that, of course, it happened. There was a big outrage. So that's the kind of behavior Elizabeth Warren has been engaging in at the same time that she's accusing Bernie Sanders surrogates of tweeting too meanly.
That was a good example of a phenomenon that I noticed in really anyone paying remotely attention to the media coverage during Warren Mania would have noticed, is that she was the recipient of the most favorable media coverage, perhaps of any candidate in a primary sense ever. She was the choice of media figures, of journalists, of political reporters, wildly in favor of Warren, wildly biased in favor of Warren, which is why you saw so many stories attempting to delegitimize Bernie Sanders as her main rival by saying that, really by guilt by association with supposedly vehement, vigorous, angry tweeting type people. It never made any sense. It was never well-founded. Of course, there were Bernie Sanders supporters who were very vocal and sending aggressive tweets. I'm sure you were one of them.
Let me finish.
Okay,
fine. All right.
That was also the case for supporters of Elizabeth Warren and supporters of every other candidate. There was no difference. There just wasn't. It was never proven that there was a difference in the tone from one group of supporters to the other. Certainly, some engage in harassment or whatever, but it was not specific at all to Bernie Sanders. That's at least what I observed. And trying to say that there's something uniquely wrong with this candidate's supporters, and also then that this has something to do with the candidate, was just totally unfounded, and it was the media's favorite story for months.
Yeah, in fact, the LA Times finally, too late, but better late than never, did a deep dive into the kind of toxic fandoms of various candidates and found that the K-Hive, it did a K-Hive expose for those of you who are blessedly not as online, that's Kamala Harris supporters, were the most vicious by a mile, and yet they got absolutely no attention, even though some of the ringleaders in real life met up with Kamala Harris's husband, took pictures together. Kamala and her husband would tweet happy birthday to some people who had said some really vicious things about special needs kids and sexual assault and like actually horrible things, not political statements, just horrible statements. I suggest everybody go and read that LA Times expose. It was really interesting. But one of the more, I don't know, maybe perhaps surprising aspects of what comes out in this section of the book is that apparently AOC on some level had bought into some aspect of this narrative. Ryan Grimm writes, Ocasio-Cortez was worried about the toxicity too. Bernie's supporters have been very, very damaging to him. This is a quote from AOC. Bernie's supporters have been very, very damaging to him, and it's really frustrating to see and experience. They don't realize how influential they are. It's frustrating to feel like they are hurting him, she said at the time. I feel like Warren is scooping up LGBT progressives, women, and progressives of color because of how they isolate, and it makes agreeing with Sanders ideologically difficult, so it feels like they're forcing an unnecessary choice between class analysis and race analysis again through their behavior, not so much policy, and it creates issues. Now, but for Bernie's heart attack, who knows what direction this endorsement could have gone in, because it does seem like she was legitimately skittish about an endorsement or association with Bernie Sanders.
What it sounds like is that the dossier of mean tweets almost worked.
It almost worked.
That was correctly, and I find it interesting that Warren or her backers thought, I guess correctly, that this was the right way to lobby AOC, not to say that we're more committed or have better plans or will be more effective at bringing about the progressive you change or any of that. Yeah. We're gonna frankly do like race and gender-based identity politics to guilt you out of this endorsement.
Yeah. Well, Elizabeth Warren ended up coming in, third place in her own state of Massachusetts. That candidacy didn't go anywhere. It seemed like AOC made the right choice, but of course there was also reporting that she seemed to have distanced herself from the campaign as it went on. Who knows to what extent. It was reported that it was the Joe Rogan pseudo-endorsement that caused some of that skittishness, which is part and parcel of the same kind of ethos that's happening here, right? Are your associates too toxic? Are your associates of the wrong brand to be a part of this big tent political coalition that was supposed to be so revolutionary in nature? So really interesting stuff here. I say to Ryan Grimm, release the dossier. We need to see these mean tweets. We need an ability to defend ourselves against these accusations. Release the dossier, Ryan.
More Rising right after this.